exactly. It brought more colonists to the area as well as some supplies. And again, nobody had any idea when they would come. It was just always some chance. Whenever they left Europe, they never knew exactly how many weeks it was going to take them to land, and they didn't know where they were going to end up. So this is quite a trek if you think they're coming over here from either Great Britain. Some of the colonists are also going to come from France and Spain to some other areas, but they've got to come all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. And back in that day, if you're in a wooden boat, it can be kind of a crazy experience to get across the ocean there. All right, before we move on with the rest of our things today, if you have your, let's pass the green sheets forward. And then also, if you have your yellow syllabus that was signed, we can pass that forward.
When do we need to get the syllabus in? Because my parents are out of town.
Well, that's just whenever they get. All right. Before we move on, we need to do our little handbook. We'll see it here. So we'll do our section. All right. So the section that we are in charge of here is emergency and safety procedures. So every building has to have its own procedures, as well as every classroom has to have our procedures. So in this classroom, if we need to evacuate, we go straight down the hallway, take a left, and go out to the freshman parking lot. And we have to go across the street so that we're away from that building. So that's what we do in case of whatever reason to evacuate from here. If it was a tornado, we would just go out to the hallway because it's cement on both sides. It's out the hallway. There are emergency plans and set up from the schools as well as the community around us. The meeting place for us, if we would have to evacuate outside, would be there's a church that's right down the hill, going backwards like down the drive. There's a church down there, and there's also the National Guard out this way. So one of those two places is where students could congregate. If you were in another part of our building, if you go to the church that's South Anchorage Church that's here by the tennis court. So those are kind of our three points if you would ever have to evacuate this building and go somewhere else. All right, if there's bad weather, they will let you know via text, mail, phone calls. It's on all of the news stations. Usually they try and call out. If they're going to call out school, they'll do it before 6 a.m. So that people have time to make plans or whatever. So if you haven't heard by like 6:15 for sure, you can be pretty confident that we're going to have school. So that's I was told my kids that when they were setting their alarms. Like, if you haven't heard by then, you better get up. So and start your day. What else do we have? Discipline. All right, student discipline. There's guidelines and a procedure. This is kind of for extreme cases of discipline that we're going to have in this class. But if there was an extreme case of discipline, security would be called. campus, you would meet with your assistant principal. Continue to get in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension. At the worst case scenario, you could be expelled from school for up to 2 years. So let's just probably not get into that. Not to worry about it. What else do we have? Have a detention teacher. Hopefully you don't meet him either, but it's down there by the office. Drugs, alcohol, and tobacco. Basically, don't do it. It's not allowed here. End of story. You don't need to do it. If you're in activities that prevent you from participating as well. There's due process, which just means we do live in America, and so if you are accused of doing something, you have a path to take so that you can defend yourself if need be. And so there's a procedure for that, and it always starts at the school level first, and then it moves on if it has to into like the superintendent's office, unless it's a criminal activity, and then it will go to the state's attorney's office. In addition to drugs, alcohol, and tobacco, e-cigarettes and vape pens are also not allowed. Just don't have to worry about it. Gang activity, you can't wear gang-related clothing and such on campus. Not a huge problem at the school. I did teach at a school that was a humongous problem at, and so every week we had to learn gang stuff was and all the signs. It was crazy. So I'm very happy that we don't have to deal with that here. Restraint and seclusion, basically that's like if you're restraining someone, don't do that. Absolutely necessary, and that goes for teachers and for students or any kind of staff members. Searches for inspections of like vehicles and locker and all those things while they're on campus is permissible. And so don't bring things in your car that are not allowed. Like if it's hunting season, don't forget that you left your gun in the car, for example, or even any of the paraphernalia that goes with it. Don't forget bow and arrows. Kids have gotten in trouble for those, knives, that kind of stuff. Definitely don't bring it to school. I don't think that's silly to do that, but don't have it in your car either. People have gotten in trouble for that. Gone on lockdowns because of it and everything else. So don't do that. They can obviously look in their locker too. They'll have the drug dog come around a few times a year as well. Students may be removed from class. Security will come and do that, or a member of administration if the teacher needs that. Long-term suspensions and expulsions. You'll still be permitted to go to school if you're in long-term suspension. So there's a teacher that handles that. I feel like so much of this doesn't really apply to you guys. This is just the student conduct. This is just a list of things that if you do this, this will happen. And 99% of it, of the things that you would do, result in some kind of an out-of-school suspension for a certain time. You just don't do it. You don't have to worry about it. Bullying policy. Bullying is prohibited from any school here. If you feel like you are being victim of a bully, please make sure that you would tell someone, tell a teacher. It doesn't even have to be the teacher that it's happening. You know, with another one. You can tell anybody. They're required to follow up on it. So if you report it, you will rest assured that it will be handled. If you are reporting it, you're seeing it happen to someone else, you can remain anonymous. So say, hey, I saw this happening in the locker room, for example, or whatever. You don't have to be involved with it from there on. You've done your duty to the whole thing, so you don't have to worry about anybody finding out or that type of thing. Sometimes that's the best way for us to handle that, is we can't always see everything that's going on or in the hallways or whatever like that. So take care of each other. There's most every everybody here, it's kind of one of those deals, there's, 98% of everybody is good and kind people, and then there's always 1 or 2% that aren't, and we don't want them to cause any, like, hurtful times. So if you see something going on, just let somebody know. You don't even have to personally find emails or to or you have to do that. And we'll take care of it from there. There's like all of these are definitions of bullying, stalking people, or cyberbullying. So if something's happening on your on devices, and that even applies to out of school hours, you can also report that to one of us. All the legal references of this. All right, these are chemical abuse. If this happens at school, if someone comes in and it appears that they are either drunk or high or whatever, a teacher will have the administration and security come get that student out of class or whatever. Lots of times they end up in the nurse's office first, is where that kind of starts to make sure they're okay, and then it will proceed from there on out. Parents will be called for sure in all of those instances. Allows the campus without a parent but in that case, then you'll probably suffer the consequences of actually doing that. But at first, the health evaluate it, make sure you're safe. And that applies to drugs as well. This is on weapons. I kind of already said this. Don't bring them to school. No reason for them to be here. All right, this last one here is school threat assessment response. This is to assure that threats of violence in the school are addressed whenever possible and before they occur. You guys are the best people that we have to know about what things are happening. You guys hear way more than we do. You hear things in the parking lots or whatever. So if you ever hear that someone is planning something or there's some kind of threat going around, even if you just think it might be a rumor, please always report that to somebody that you trust, a staff member. And again, we're required to follow up with it. But you guys are the best eyes and ears that we have. Much more apt to hear something than we are. And so kind of we're the ones that walk into a room where we walk into the hallway and stops talking there and kind of things. And so you guys, if you hear something, please let one of us know. Take care of it there. And again, you can stay anonymous in that whole thing. Hopefully it never becomes. And also take care of each other. If you're someone that's really troubled or somebody that's having like suicidal and that type of thing, if you're not sure how serious they are or not, please report that to somebody so that we can take care of that too. And again, you don't ever have to be attached to it, but you guys are the best resource for something like that, so we can make sure everybody's safe. All right. Oh, we have all the heavy things. Okay. Discipline matrix. Basically, the discipline matrix is just a whole list of, like, and again, it's kind of the try and deal with it at the teacher level. If the teacher can't deal with it, then it goes to a counselor, and then it goes to admin, it goes to security. I mean, it's kind of like a step. So for 99% of people, to learn about it, but there's one in place. So if you find yourself in that situation, that's what step by step. Are there any questions about any of these? I hate that we have to have policies for all this stuff, but unfortunately we do. It's every once in a while we have to mess it up. So. All right. Yes.
Why is pepper spray covered?
Because it could be used to everybody wants to post it. All right, before we move on to our curriculum that we want to do for today, we're going to finish up what we started on, I get my so yeah, but the week like this, so Wednesday when you were here, which was that lateral reading assignment. So you were looking at, you looked up a news article, and then you looked up a liberal one and a conservative one. And so I don't want to spend a ton of time on it today, but I do want you to get the idea. So the most important numbers that I want filled out on your sheet are numbers 1 and 3, which are going to say your 3 different articles and what differences you found. So if you get nothing else done with it, that's what I want you to get done. And we're going to only take probably 5-10 minutes at the absolute most to finish this. So get with your group, make sure that you remember everyone.
We start right?
Your group. And what?
Yeah, we did it before.
Oh, we didn't start it all in this class?
You showed us the chart.
We did the chart, okay. I can remember because every class is a different spot. Okay, so what you're going to do is just like I said, you're going to get with your group, which is going to be your row. So pull your desks together. You're going to pick some topic. And so, for instance, 90% of the people today have been picking Afghanistan because breaking news is on the front page of every website. So that would be an easy one to do. Not easy, but it's a good example of one to do. And then you're going to pick from the center. I've got the chart, but I'm going to put it up here anyway, so let's just put it up right now. Okay, so we talked about this chart. So you're going to, I would start in the middle. So pick either the AP, BBC, USA Today, those are probably the best ones to pick, and see how they're covering this. And then in your group have, you should have at least 3 computers going at the same time. Pull up one from the right and one from the left. Okay, so pick something from this column and then something from one of these columns. And see what the difference is on how different websites are covering the same story. Okay? So you're going to list those at number 1. You're going to list your very first one. Number 3, you're going to list the other 2. And then you're going to come up with what you see are some differences or how they're kind of trying to, maybe they're playing to one kind of audience as opposed to another audience. If you pick some of these really obscure ones, maybe they're not covering it at all. And that's something that you should consider as well. Okay? So go ahead, get with your group. We'll spend probably 10 minutes on this. I forgot this start at all. I had 2 classes that didn't start at all, so this was one of them. And so that's what I want you to focus on, numbers 1 and number 3 on the, and you only need 1 person to fill it out in your group. Make sure everybody's name is on it, and then when they submit it, I will make sure that it gets to all of the rest of it.
How recent does the news thing need to be?
Today.
It needs to be from
it has
today.
to be happening right now. Yep. So go to one of these sites and find some news that's happening right now.
Okay, Jack?
Yeah.
So you find a website in the R&R,
Yeah.
and
Plug it back there.
whatever topic you find, we'll look at. So Maddie Dukes.
Or I can go borrow one. Do you want me to go borrow one for you to use as well?
So whatever topic you find.
Where's CNBC on there? Oh, I see. Okay, never mind.
Okay, perfect. There's lots of outlets back there.
Wait, you want to do Afghanistan? Because that's all it's popular.
Well, that was a COVID vaccine. That top stuff we can find.
I don't think the news articles from what I've seen are mostly like similar in how they're reporting the vaccine.
Really? Because there are people who say you shouldn't get the vaccine or you should get the vaccine. But there's so many contradicting sides.
Yeah, but they're like both coming from the same. I mean, yeah, we could do that, but like they're both. Some have. They have some of both. Yeah.
People define who thinks
Yeah.
should get it and thinks you shouldn't.
So you guys want me to do the right lean one?
Try to do the R's. Like that. Yeah.
You can see this website, they don't have like that.
Huh?
You can't read the
Oh yeah. Okay.
Kind of fuzzy from
No, I'm a little blind.
Do the American Spectator. Okay. I'm gonna do
In the Daily Wire.
I'm gonna do the NBC.
My brother.
Wait, did they approve the Pfizer or the PFINS vaccine? Pfizer, or how you spell that?
Yeah.
Oh.
For not
Yep,
long
it starts with a
ago,
P, but it's Pfizer. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to
something about
like do like a Pfizer game. There you go.
Yep, they approved Pfizer.
It's okay, now we know. So now we're good. Okay, so you found one?
No. What? I can't.
I know. So you.
Dating.
Sorry. Sure. And my thoughts. Why are you looking at me like that? Hello, I'm sorry. Did I break this up to school? Thank you very much.
There's one called Mom. I wish I got vaccinated. Final words a teacher of 32 killed by COVID days after giving birth.
That's really scary.
Okay, here we go. Pfizer CEO says vaccine resistant strain of COVID-19 is null. You see,
What? Found one?
found a couple. Mom, I wish I would have gotten vaccinated. Final words of teacher of 32 killed by COVID days after giving birth.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
Okay, well, do you want to do that one?
Maybe. I was thinking this one.
Okay. So find the date of the article and then tell us the title.
Alrighty.
Will they all be called the same? It's the same story.
It will be, the headline will be exactly
Okay,
the
here
same.
we go.
Just search for the topic. Like what topic did you guys search for? Okay, so you probably are going to have to go to other websites and then in their search bar, put in COVID vaccination and see what you get.
How many of those should we test for each column? Just one?
Just one.
Okay.
And you only have to do 3 total. So not even all 5.
Okay. I got one.
Okay. Just make sure that there's at least one from one of the ones with an L and one from an R.
Okay, I have a question about the end. When I take it, okay, so my I always carry around a paper spray on my jeans for safety because I have to travel a lot. So should I take it off before I go to school and try and put it back on when I go out in public, or
You could give it to the office.
I would, because if somebody sees you with it, they are gonna.
because I just always put it in my backpack, but like, and then with being able to go through my car, what if I left it in my car and then my phone would say,
Well, if you left it in your car and put it like in your luggage or anything like that, if they can't see it, it's really okay. It's honestly when got in trouble with weapons and stuff.
if I just keep my keys in my backpack, put that would be like,
As long as nobody
So,
because if they did see it,
I just don't want to have to take it off and put it back on all the time because I have a pain because when I was carrying,
I just don't want to trust people. People are scary.
okay,
But what is it?
I don't get off work until,
sorry,
I don't get off work till 10 and then walking in
No,
and
so-
it's dark when I get out, it's like,
What's it called again?
I got a new one.
yeah,
Um,
I just didn't know what the,
oh my goodness. Chicago police say hell no to CPD's vows court action against
Okay,
Mayor
say all
Lawrence.
that while I'm writing.
Okay, good idea.
Okay, go.
Chicago police say hell no. Then CPD vows court action against
Wait,
Mayor.
you're too fast.
Here.
All I got was hell no. I really don't this.
No, I am too.
Bro, okay. Oh, we can do number 3. There are at least 2 other information stories.
So my headline is CNN is the latest on
Okay. What's your
Get it?
No!
No, it's
No!
it's on the Daily Mail.
Oh, I thought we were all just. Oh.
We're all just one.
Okay, never mind. I'm so sorry. Okay.
Wait, what?
I'm pretty sure what we're supposed to do is you're supposed to look up a website that's in the arts. Okay. And then yeah, and then you look up one in center, and I'll look up one in left, but it'll be like mainly about the same thing.
Yes, it
COVID
just has to
vaccine.
be like,
To see how they, even if they're reporting on the same thing.
if they're kind of giving a little bit of an opinion, like, I think you should get the vaccine. Or if they see, like, they're trying to push forward the vaccine. Like a bias.
Okay, so I'm gonna check that one. So, okay.
Do you need this?
No, thank you. Dude, you could totally do the pregnancy one like that lady was down in the
That would
I
be
have an exact one right now.
Okay.
I found it.
not much.
Do it about like vaccines and pregnancy.
Or vaccine and death, or chances of dying from a vaccine or something. Just something along that.
Called me for pregnant. There's no going back from that. I'm not. I'm not.
Well, that's
Girl, no. I can swear. We did not. All we did was go to lunch. Just something. What's that? Okay, but my sister. Okay. What are you doing?
Oh my god, there's so many ads on this website. Texas teacher.
Are you kidding me?
Mama.
New York Times is terrible.
Isn't it owned by Amazon?
They literally just want money.
There's so many ads on this website. It's not even like.
It's literally I just read a great article. Shouldn't they all be following?
They should be.
okay. So the site I'm on is probably gonna. Kaylee, you might have to take it different because I found it very biased. And I found the FDA, like the FDA.gov.
That wouldn't be biased.
Wait, so what are they doing?
Because the FDA pushes vaccines.
Oh yeah.
They're very for vaccination.
Oh, 500.
But I found them very for. I know Chloe. She's like, oh, do that.
Honestly, she's so bored. Oh, she actually talks like never texts me. Like calls me.
We always text back and forth, but it's not like long. I'm very short.
Okay, I found like an anti-vaccine one.
That's exciting.
Or no.
Bro, sorry, what?
No, I got a pro-vaccine one, kind of.
I got a pro vaccine.
Are these vaccines for pregnancy? Or just vaccines?
Well, it talks.
I've got people side.
It talks. So, mom, she didn't get vaccinated until she got after birth, and I think she got COVID or something. She got COVID without getting vaccinated. She didn't get vaccinated because she was pregnant.
All right,
And she
we
got
have
COVID
about
and died
1 minute left
after
to
she
finish
gave
up. So on number 3, you should have your study sources and something that you found that was different or how their program was different.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Do you want to pick your number? I don't think we're good at this one.
Yeah. I need to get contacts approved though, so it's gonna be a little bit.
It's not. I'll text Chloe. She's got better.
Yeah, I don't think I do.
I don't think I have to. I think I know.
Okay, what am I doing here? What's the number?
He has to figure out.
Okay. 6 to 5.
Is this true? Which one's this? Yes, this one.
Yeah.
Do you have a pencil?
Oh, okay. Hey.
We're doing like more curtains.
Yeah. Come on, that's gonna be good. I don't want
Do you have a pencil I can borrow?
Yes, in that gray cup right there. You can grab whatever you want. You might have to use a pencil sharpener about it.
I mainly practice and everything, and I'm going harder on the sides, and also like make sure the cylinder lines and everything. I don't know. Weird ones are made into this. Okay. Please just told me.
Oh yeah.
We're gonna do this tonight, and we're gonna finish it.
I've worked till 8.
Yeah. Can you do it like Sunday maybe?
Oh yeah, I
Yeah,
work
'cause I've
till
worked
10.
till like 8, and it takes me an hour to.
Yeah, I have comps. I'm gonna be on the bus. So can you do Sunday?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Well, because I work till 10.
I know the due date's tonight, but it's fine.
Yeah, I think it'll be fine.
It's fine.
605
Oh wait, okay. 65.
877 5177.
That's a lot of stuff.
I know.
Okay, I gotta make that contract.
Then what's your name again?
My name is Jane. I know, it's really confusing.
I know how to say it.
Oh crap! It auto corrected one second.
I know, it's so stupid. I know. I can never just type my name without.
Thank you.
And every time I try and type in Super Haley, and now
Do you guys know what that other kid's name was?
Yeah.
Then what's your name?
M-A-D-I.
Alrighty.
Huh?
Oh my gosh.
I can't hear you. That's when I met your mother. Yep, that's when I met your mom.
No. I was gonna bring you over, but I still left it in my car.
She was gonna bring you food.
I was gonna bring you food, and I actually left it in my car.
All right, submit what you have, whatever you got done. Make sure everybody's name was on it, please. And then let's put the desks back where they are. And you don't need your computer, so you go ahead
No,
and
we
shut it.
do. It's weird. We just have weird.
We always have internet about the
No, we don't usually do, but I want to give you one because she never gets recorded.
So I'm kind of ran out of time.
ever gonna she wants the job. She can't quit on campus.
I don't know why she would. You don't work for somebody.
She needs to figure out how to quit and still make sure
Alright, number one time passes it.
145.
145, okay. Let's stop.
Just at 140.
Alright,
Shit,
And then
yeah.
our next
I
class
want to
starts.
take a couple of
That's my
minutes
last period.
to talk about Afghanistan because a lot of you guys were looking things up and it's something that we should probably all know a little bit about anyway. We study history because to explain what's happening in the present and to make sure we need to look backwards a little bit. So Afghanistan is this little circular country that is purple on this map. It is completely landlocked, and so it doesn't have any ports. It doesn't have very many resources, so it kind of has a lot of strikes against it right out of the gate. There's some parallels between this area and the colonization of North America. Both of them were inhabited by native peoples. They were both tribal areas. In this area, there were many tribes that the people still to this day very much identify with. And that's part of the problem with the United States when they're trying to change things around. It didn't really understand the culture of the people that were there. If you don't understand that, it's really hard to impose your values on someone else. And so in this area, in the Afghanistan, there's about 9 different major tribes that are there. When this border was drawn around this country, they did not take into account where these tribes were. And so the border doesn't follow the tribe. So one day you're all living together as your tribe, and the next day there's this line, border that's made, and now half of your tribe might be over in Iran, or half your tribe might be in Pakistan, for example, or any of these other countries that are up here. And the people to this day still identify more with their tribe than they do with their country. So when the United States went in there 20 years ago, they went in after the 9/11 attacks, and the reason they did was because Osama bin Laden was the leader of the terror group that was responsible for that attack. And Afghanistan was one that was hiding him and helping him stay hidden from the United States and others. And so when we got into Afghanistan to try to find him, the government that was in charge was called the Taliban. And the Taliban is horrible. There's just no other way to say that. They have absolutely zero respect for women. Women have to wear a burqa, which is a full covering head to toe. They have a little bit of like a nylon piece right here that they can kind of see through, but not very well. They're not allowed to have education. They can't drive. They can't have a job. Basically, they can't do anything that a man doesn't tell them that they can do. They can be violated in every way. Crimes can be committed against them, and they have no legal standing. They really can't do anything. And so that was how women were being treated. So after this 9/11 attack, and the Americans go in, they're like, Afghanistan, not only would they need to be punished for housing a terrorist, but they also need to have a government. This is ridiculous. This is a humanitarian crisis. We need to save the people of Afghanistan. And so the United States went in there, and their goals were to help establish a government in which people vote for their leaders and to strengthen their military so that they can defend their own borders. Because Afghanistan has repeatedly been invaded by the Soviets earlier than by the Taliban, and so they've had a rough history. And so the Americans went in there, and we've been there for 20 years. So over those 20 years, in the last probably 7 to 8 years, it's become apparent that this goal of trying to make them self-sufficient isn't working. They were able to have free elections, and they voted, and they elected a president. And so that part was good. Women, their rights, that changed drastically. They were now allowed to go to school. The Americans set up this huge educational system there. And so they were allowed to go to school. They could have jobs. They could freely move about the country. They didn't wear burqas. They still wore the veils and such that a lot of these Arab countries do, but they did not have to wear a burqa. And so a lot of advances were made, but this idea that we could train the military and that they could protect their borders, it just wasn't ever going to work, because the soldiers were very happy to defend their tribal areas, but they don't think of themselves as Afghan. So if you ask them their nationality, they're going to tell you their tribe's name. They're not going to tell you that they're an Afghan citizen. And so it would kind of like be if our military, our soldier, and then maybe some of you will choose to do that after high school, be a soldier for our U.S. military. You're defending the United States. If anyone asks you right away, you say, I'm here to defend the United States. You wouldn't say, well, I'm only going to defend you. Okay, and that's kind of the best example I can think of to give you. It's just not in their culture that they're going to defend this big country that they didn't want to be a part of ever. They wanted to just be with their tribe. And so the last three administrations, so Obama, Trump, and Biden, have all tried to figure out a way to get out of Afghanistan. And ideally, leave there, and keep the government intact, but that probably wasn't going to happen. So then trying to figure out how to get out of Afghanistan, the least amount of problems, has been what the last three administrations have been trying to figure out. When Trump was in power, had negotiated with the Taliban to come up with a reasonable, like a peaceful way for us to get out. He had set the deadline as first of this year. Then he didn't win the election, and so when Biden came in, he kept the agreement with the Taliban, except he extended it to August 31st. He said that we just need time to get out. Now, there's lots of debates over whether Biden should have kept that agreement, should have renegotiated, and whatever. You can read all about that. But anyway, so the time has been set to August 31st. And right now, the Taliban has taken back over the entire country. So as we keep moving out, we are only in Kabul, which is the capital city. At this point, they have retaken over the entire country. In Kabul, they have taken over the presidential headquarters. The president left about 2 weeks ago, left the country, the one that was elected, and the Taliban have retaken over. For right now, the Taliban is honoring the agreement that they said that they would, which they're allowing Americans to leave. They're allowing the Afghan, anyone that was from that's Afghan that helped the military in the last 20 years, they're allowing them all to leave as well and their families. Because if they don't, they'll kill them. If the Taliban knows that you worked for the American military at any time, whether you were a translator, a teacher, anything, a contractor, they're going to think of you as a traitor. And not only you, but your family is likely to be killed. And so right now, they're allowing those people to, we're calling it airlift, out of there. So far, they've taken about 111,000 people out of Afghanistan in the last few weeks. There's about, I read that there's about 5,000 left they want to try and get out of there. But they have to be out by August 31st. The Taliban has said after that, no more. They will not allow our planes in or out, and they will not allow their people to park there. And so this was all has been happening for the last couple of weeks. And then yesterday there was a terrorist attack, and this terrorist attack was called ISIS-K. ISIS-K doesn't like the Taliban, and they also don't like Americans. And so they are very happy to target us and Taliban all at the same time. And so they sent a suicide bomber into this gate that you have to go through to get to the airport to leave Afghanistan, and they killed 13 U.S. soldiers and about 170 Afghan people. Our intelligence knew this was going to happen, and they warned people, don't come to this gate, or the gates. They didn't know exactly which gate. They said, don't come to the airport gates. The problem with saying that is that's the only way out of the country. So, for example, if you're a woman living in Afghanistan right now, and you know that the Taliban's taking over in a week, and you just want to get the heck out of there, telling you to not go to the airport, that's a hard decision to make. Something might happen. and you know something bad's going to happen. Stay there. So people have had to make just really tough, hard choices. And so currently, the attack happened yesterday, kind of about yesterday morning, it's before lunchtime yesterday. And so they have restarted the airlift. We have help. There are other countries that are helping us. The British are helping us. The Australians are helping us. There's some other countries as well that are flying planes out on this runway that they're allowing us to use. And so they take out several thousand people. I mean, some days they're like 1,000 people a day. And so some days they take out a lot, so not as many. They have restarted this, but it's definitely a very high stress situation now, worrying about if there'll be another attack or something like that. So it's definitely a good lesson in you have to understand the people, you have to understand people's cultures. There's going to be a lot that'll have to be learned about the military strategy that was used, and those types of things that hopefully our people will learn a lot of things from this so they can change and be better. Sure. What I want you to do over the weekend is just occasionally check a couple of headlines, kind of keep up with what's going on, because when we meet again on Tuesday, that is the deadline day. That's August 31st. And so we'll have a conversation about where we're at, what happened, and with it, that we're able to get all of the rest of the people out. I think they said there's under 100 Americans that are left there, so the other 4,000 or so people are all Afghans that they that have been identified that they want to get out of there. So anyway, we've been taking out big, huge numbers. So I mean, if it was everything going as normal, it shouldn't be a problem to get them all out. We of course also have to get all of our military units there as well. And so there's thousands right now helping this whole thing. Does anybody have any questions or other things they want to add? Yes, Jack.
I know when the UK left the Middle East and like the Europeans, they split up all those countries. Like they didn't take it, like they knew the borders, so they wouldn't be able to like grow. Like if you split them up, then they'll start, fighting and not what like in their countries.
Yeah, it's always been when you're a conquered person and someone's conquered you, another country has conquered you, and they have this power to, for instance, draw borders and those types of things. They do it for their own personal reasons, their own political reasons, their own strategic reasons, and a lot of times they don't take into account the people that are actually living there, the consequences of that, and that's definitely something that's happened in Afghanistan. Anybody else? All right, so we're going to move on to talking about the colonies in America. There's a couple of things. I need to switch this map, and I wish I had one map that showed all of these things all at the same time. And so we're going to be talking about Great Britain, which is up here, which is England, Scotland, and Ireland. Ireland's actually green up here, but they're all together. Then we're going to have France. Spain is yellow, and then Portugal is green. So the time period we're talking about is approximately, and so these countries are the top countries. These are like the big four in the world. They are the ones that have the most commerce, but they've also been at war. They've been at war for literally 100 years. They have wars with each other. They have wars with other European countries. It's been a constant state of war. And at this point in time, they are looking for colonies because they need more resources, they need raw material. Their populations are also growing, and you can tell that these are really small. Yes, states in our country that are bigger than these countries. And so they need more room. They need to be able to grow more food. They need more resources. In England, they can't really grow much of anything. So hunger is a problem here. So they start sending explorers out to try and find areas. And the West Indies, I don't remember this, but I'm going to talk about the West Indies later. So the West Indies is this Caribbean area. That's the first place that they find, is all those islands. And they grow a lot of crops in the West Indies that they don't have in Europe. So they're very excited. So now this is getting very exciting, and they're going to start looking more and more this way to find more sources. They have things like sugar over here. They have rum, things like that that we don't have over here in Europe at this time. Let me switch this over really quick. All right. So this is the United States. Obviously, this is the East Coast that we're looking at right here. How many of you have ever moved from one house to another in Rapid City? Okay. How many of you have moved to a different city? Lived somewhere other than Rapid City? Okay. How many of you have lived in another state? How about another country? Okay, where have you lived? Where else?
Sweden, where my dad was in the Air Force.
Super cool. Where have you lived? Okay, not another country. Okay. All right. And in every one of my classes, I've had at least one person in another country. That's pretty cool. And so, why do you suppose you move? Why do people move? You already said one reason: the military for a job. Okay, what else?
Like to live closer or further from family.
Okay, so family considerations. Politics, absolutely. Okay, the size of the house. I just forgot it. Never mind. Okay, we'll come back. Think about it.
A better life.
Okay, a better life. You might want to start over again, Sam. Okay, taxes, absolutely. We've had a lot of people move into South Dakota after the pandemic, like from California, for example, because our housing is a lot cheaper here than what they have, for example.
But there's like college. They just stay there.
Okay, exactly. You might move away for education. Perfect.
Like a normal job wants you to switch locations.
Okay, exactly. You might want to move to another opportunity around. So there's lots and lots of reasons why people move. And so we call those push and pull factors. So sometimes you move and you don't really want to move, but because the circumstances are so bad where you are forced to move. Maybe you lost your job, for example. Okay? Maybe you can't make a living wherever you are. If you're a farmer and there's a drought, you can't stay where you are, so you have to move. Sometimes we move because we're pulled by another opportunity. And so you mentioned, like in jobs, a better paying job, maybe there's a better house that you can go into. And so those we call pull factors, because those are things that are pulling you somewhere new. So the colonists were the same. They had reasons that they wanted to move. The countries themselves had reasons that they wanted colonies, and they had to get places to go. So some of the reasons that colonists left were political. There was a lot of war, like I just said. There was a lot of political unrest, we also said. With this, there's also a lot of overpopulation happening, and there's just not enough room. In a lot of these countries, if your family hasn't owned land for like 5 generations, you're never going to own land. Because it's passed down to family member to family member, and there's never an opportunity to buy land. So a huge pull factor was land ownership colonies. And they promised people, if you go to the colonies, you can have your own land, have your own farm, take care of yourself, you can go there. Also, in a lot of these countries, especially in France in particular, there was what we call the feudal system, in which if you were born into a peasant class, which is the lowest class, you can never get out of it. If you're born into the mercantile class, you can never get out of it. You have to do whatever your family does. That's it. So a lot of these people wanted a different opportunity. The other really big reason was religious persecution. And in Great Britain, obviously the place that made the colonies here in our United States now, religious persecution played a huge role in this. Henry VIII was literally crazy, one that had all the wives and chops their heads off and such. He wanted to be the head of the church, and they were Catholic at the time. Well, the Pope was like, "You're not going to be the head of the church. I'm the head of the church, and that's how this is." He didn't like that, and so he created his own church, called it the Church of England, and yes, he was the top leader of that himself. And so when he did that, he did not want to be, you were not allowed to practice Catholicism anymore. So if you were Catholic and you did didn't switch over to the Church of England, you would lose your land, you could lose your home, you could lose your job, all of these things. And so a lot of those people moved over to the colonies where they could free to practice their own religion. When they got here, the colonists faced a lot of challenges. If you look at our coastline here, this is a topographical map, you can see, first of all, we have this wall of mountains. This is the Appalachian Mountains right here. The colonists for the first about 150 years to 200 years didn't really go past this. It was kind of the end point, because it was just huge to get over. And really there was enough land anyway. If your ship, when you got on the ship in England, you didn't know exactly where you were going to end up, because storms can come up, they can navigate it correctly, all kinds of things can happen. So it could be that you really wanted to be a farmer and you wanted to be down here, but your ship ended up clear up here in Massachusetts, and all of a sudden it's snowing, and now you don't have any provisions that you need for snow. And so there was a lot of chance when you got on a ship. That also kind of speaks to the point that you had to have kind of dire circumstances to decide that you're going to get on a wooden ship and go across an ocean for over a month, and then land somewhere that you don't even know. But when your life isn't very good, you'll take a chance on something better. Up in this area, what they mostly ended up focusing on was like the timber industry, some fishing. The towns were usually more centered here, and there's shopkeeping opportunities. In the middle colonies, they had some farms, but they were more like your family farms. You were growing your own, like for your own family. And also shops. They had, later on, this will become a manufacturing center. And down here is going to be agriculture. And that's because you can tell that it's very flat down here. That's not something that they had in Europe. So people were very excited about that opportunity. There was all this farmland here. So we break the colonies down into 3 groups: the New England, the middle colonies, and then the southern. Today we're only going to talk about the southern colonies. So I like to have mnemonics to help me remember things. So the 5 colonies in here can be remembered by my vehicle needs some gas. My vehicle needs some gas. And so these colonies are very good for agriculture. Not much else, but very good for agriculture. But it's a very different kind of agriculture than what they're used to. So if you came from Europe and all of a sudden this is the type of land you had to do, this is going to be really different. They did the plantation model, which means that you would have really, really large farms, and you would grow cash crops. So these aren't crops that are going to feed your family. These are crops that you're going to sell to earn money, and then you're going to buy food for money. So that's a whole different concept than the kind of farming that they're used to in Europe. Our cash crops were things like cotton and tobacco, mostly. What this did was created a real class system. You had the very wealthy people that were the ones that owned all the land, and then you had all the workers. Originally, the workers were the other immigrants that were coming over here, the ones that were poor. And then secondly, they started using indentured servants. And so indentured servants were people that were in Europe, and they couldn't afford a ticket over to the colonies. And so the planters would send over a representative, and he would say, I'll pay for your ticket to come over here. In exchange, you owe me 7 years of service on my farm. And then after 7 years, I'll give you some tools, and you can go out and make your own money. That's what a lot of people did. Kind of already talked about Virginia. That's where Jamestown was. That was the first colony. Maryland was where that group of Catholics that I talked about, they came over from England. They settled in Maryland. They were kind of a curious group because they went from being a persecuted group that when they came over, they made their own colony and they didn't want any other religions in it. So they became the persecutors in there. They just weren't allowed to be there anymore, Catholic. Then we have Georgia. And if you look at where Georgia is on the map, yellow here, Georgia simply was here for one reason, and that was to be a buffer state, because Florida was owned by Spain, and English and Spain hated each other, and so they had this buffer state. So so what England did was they emptied out all their prisons, all the prisoners, sent them over on a ship, and put them in Georgia. And so you can imagine this was not really the place to be. You don't really have any families or anything that are going to be in Georgia. It's kind of lawlessness. It took a long time for Georgia to kind of get their act together and together a decent colony. So they're kind of just a buffer state. North and South Carolina, they're going to start out being just one colony, a great big huge colony, and then eventually they're going to start arguing over what kind of government they want to have. So they're going to bring it into. So there's going to become a time when the indentured servants, immigrants, are not going to be enough workers to keep this plantation system going. And so what ends up happening is there's a lot of trade going on between the West Indies, right? Those are all those islands, those Caribbean islands, and those colonies, because they sell sugar and rum. And it turns out that the colonists like sugar and rum. And so there was a lot of trade going on. And they found out from the West Indies that they used African slaves in the West Indies to be their farm workers. And so they felt like the African slaves were not human, and so you could treat them the way you treated them. And so that is the way that this got introduced into the American colonies. So these slaves that we're talking about came from Western Africa. These areas were, this was also a tribal region. They were controlled by warlords. There was constant fighting going on. And so whenever one warlord would take over another, they would imprison people there, and then those prisoners would be sold to the slave traders. And so most of them oftentimes were just rounded up by each tribe would round up other tribal members, and they would sell them. They would get money. They would also trade slaves for tools that were coming in from Europe, their metal tools and weapons. So they used those in fighting. So they would load up the slave ships here and then send them over. And you can see the West Indies, 4.5 million slaves were sent over here over time. We have about 500,000 here. They also are going to be sent down here to South America. This is a picture of a slave ship. So each of these dots is a person. So you can see how tightly they were gathered into the slave ships. We're going to watch a short video that kind of illustrates all of this, and I think you'll understand a little more after you see it.
My job is to make college easier because students have a lot of problems. From about 1525 to 1866, 12.5 million Africans were taken from their homeland and forcibly transported across the Atlantic, a journey that approximately 2 million of them would not survive. By the turn of the 18th century, European merchants were building vessels capable of transporting hundreds of enslaved people per journey. These ships had extra portholes for ventilation, weapons mounted on deck in case of rebellion, and additional compartments added below deck to take on more human cargo. Before boarding the ships at African port cities, enslaved people were stripped of their clothing and remaining possessions, and had their heads forcibly shaved. During boarding, which could take weeks or even months, enslaved people lived on the deck of the ship in a temporary wooden house constructed by the crew. The crew also installed netting around the deck of the ship, designed to catch those enslaved who might opt for death over forced servitude. Once moved below deck, enslaved people would find themselves stuffed into compartments with ceilings as low as 4.5 feet, where they would spend most of their voyage. They were segregated by gender and age. Adult men were kept separately and shackled in pairs. Women usually left unchained in their designated compartments, and children often free to move about the ship. There were no sanitary facilities of any kind. Enslaved people were forced to relieve themselves where they sat, creating hellish conditions when combined with the heat and lack of ventilation below deck. Disease was rampant. Dysentery, malaria, yellow fever, smallpox, measles, and influenza ravaged the enslaved and crew members alike. The enslaved people generally spent about 8 hours a day above deck, but were still separated by gender, with a barricado, a reinforced wall that could be used to protect crew members in case of a revolt. Enslaved people were also subject to forced exercise, which sometimes included dance and song for the entertainment of the crew. Enslaved captives deemed disobedient were tortured and beaten, usually whipped with the especially cruel cat o' nine tails, a tool designed to inflict maximum pain. Enslaved people who refused to eat their typical meal of rice and beans were forced to do so, sometimes with a speculum oris, a medieval tool used to force open a person's mouth. Women, while usually left unshackled, were raped and sexually abused by members of the crew, sometimes arriving in the New World, carrying the children of their attackers. But it was the women, using their minuscule freedoms, who would often coordinate mutinies against their captors. But these rebellions were rarely successful. The true extent of the horrors of the Middle Passage came to light in a 1783 court trial over the slave ship Zong. The Zong left present-day Ghana in August of 1781 with 442 enslaved on board. After a 2-month journey riddled with navigation errors, 62 enslaved people and 7 crew members had perished without reaching their destination. Disease was spreading throughout the ship, and fresh water was running dangerously low. Captain Luke Collingwood was afraid of the financial cost of more deaths. Enslaved people that died of disease were not covered by the ship's insurance, but the enslaved who drowned were. Collingwood ordered approximately 130 enslaved people thrown overboard. He claimed it was necessary to do so to halt the spread of disease. At the trial between the Zong's owners and their insurance company, the owners argued that because it was legal to kill sick animals for the health of a ship, it was legal to treat enslaved people the same. The court agreed with the ship's owners, but the trial itself exposed the horrors aboard the Zong, and its story was republished by British abolitionists with the name of the ship redacted, meant to show that this tragedy could happen on any ship transporting enslaved people across the Middle Passage. 24 years after the Zong trial, the international slave trade was outlawed in both Great Britain and the United States. It would take England an additional 26 years, and the U.S. another 58 years plus a civil war before the practice of slavery was officially abolished.
So, like at the very end of that, it said it actually was in 1806 here in the United States that slave trade was abolished, but that didn't mean that people that weren't already here that were slaves, that is going to continue until the end of the Civil War, which is in 1865. So no new slaves could be brought in, somewhere illegally, but all the slaves here kept procreating, and so there was anyone that was born into slavery was also. And so the slave population kept growing even after the slave trade ended. The last thing I wanted to point out on here is that the reason that the slave trade continued for so long is that it was very profitable, because all 3 points of this triangular trade, we call it a triangular, it's a triangle, it was beneficial to all 3 parties. The Europeans had a lot of manufactured goods. They had a lot of metal tools and weapons. That's what the Africans wanted. So they would trade their slaves for those tools. They would then send their slaves over here to North America, where that's where they need them to be workers. But North America had a lot of food and raw materials, and that's what the Europeans needed. And so it was a very, this trade benefited all three parties, and that's what made it, unfortunately, so profitable and why it continued for as long as it did. We're gonna finish today, we only have about 10 minutes or so. We're gonna work on a map that we're gonna use kind of as a,
Yeah.
I said 45. I meant 40.
get used to the times. Okay. Well, I just gonna pass these out so that you have them. I'll give you time to work on them in class on Tuesday. But what this is just the colonies. The instructions are on it, but what I want you to be careful of is Massachusetts actually had two parts to it at the beginning. And so when you're coloring, you have to be a little bit careful about those parts. You'll end up with plenty of irons on Tuesday. And then also put it in your folders. What you're gonna do when you get this, there are three things to do, and in the past